Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of Fever Ray's Radical Romantics album. Fever Ray is Karen Dreyer from Sweden and one half of, with her brother, or their brother. Actually followed them for a long time. I don't know if it's always been there instead of she. One half of the sibling duo The Knife from Sweden, who formed in 1999 and are one of my favourite acts of the century, particularly from their second and third albums, Deep Cuts and Silent Shouts. They were one of the best acts of the zeros, the noughties. In between, after Silent Shout, one of the greatest albums this century, The Knife went into some kind of hiatus, returning with Shaking the Habitual, a much more industrial, politicised album in 2013, and I think have pretty much gone into hibernation again since. Along the way, Dreyer has maintained a solo career as Fever Ray, releasing, this is the third album, so we got Fever Ray self-titled in 2009, Plunge in 2017, so a fair gap. That period occupied by Shaking the Habitual, a band album, and Radical Romantics, which has just come out. I felt the same about Dreyer's solo work, almost exactly as I felt about Tom York's solo work, which is, I'd rather listen to Radiohead. I've always admired them more than loved them or gone back to listen to them. This one I feel much more like the Smile album that came out last year with Johnny Greenwood and Tom York, instantly more compelling than anything else. It sounded less insular and less, more aimed at the listener perhaps, more engaging, more instantly gratifying, less sort of texturally off-putting or oblique. This one's really directed at the listener. We really have to talk about this cover for Radical Romantics. It's a picture of Karen Dreyer that I think should be banned. It's so horrible. I can't explain it, but even knowing this picture exists is upsetting to me. The first track, What They Call Us, instantly shows something that has been missing from both The Knife since 2006 and from Dreyer's solo work as Fever Ray, which is sounding an awful lot like The Knife did between Deep Cuts and Silent Shout, which is awesome. I don't care if it's going back, it's their sound, and it's one of my favourite of this century. The opening line, and the lyrics on the album are incredibly strong. First, I'd like to say that I'm sorry is the first line. It's immediately more engaging to the listener. Everything on this album seems to be directed very much straightforward at the listener. The musical soundstage is quite minimal. There's quite confidently minimal. There aren't that many elements to it. And it does, as I said, occupy that period between Deep Cuts and Silent Shout where they were one of my favourite acts ever. The second track, Shiver, shows that the vocals on this album are really good because they're quite open and often untreated, but they deliver quite a different range of emotive styles across the album. A lot of it quite unfiltered, and a lot of the sort of, when there are background sonic embellishments, do remind me of that Deep Cut Silent Shout era, which I'm so fond of. And the lyrics are quite yearning as well. They're quite often playful, but there's a very deep yearning going on. I thought track 3, New Utensils, a more industrial track, was a little bit more approaching a filler track than the very strong opening ones. And Candy, track 4, probably my second favourite on the album. Really standout, subtle melody. A lot of the melodies on this are quite curly and subtle and sort of wrap themselves around you without you noticing it. And another great vocal, really again sounding like early Knife. Another strong track is Even It Out, which has got Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. So is there a sample from Nine Inch Nails on here? Possibly, but yeah, it's very much more industrial. It actually reminded me of the kind of music that Buffalo Bill would listen to in Silence of the Lambs. It's got this real death disco feel. I've got quite an affinity for music I imagine that Buffalo Bill listens to. I don't think that's a healthy thing to admit, but it's got this real sort of gothic death disco feel, which I love. Looking for a Ghost, another curly melody, and there's a real coyness to Drea's delivery and vocals and lyrics on this album at times. Carbon Dioxide, another very strong track. A lot of these tracks are really concise. They don't expand that much, but this one's got a good key change into the chorus and is a little bit more expansive. It's got some very trancey synths in it, and it really did remind me of Crystal Castles. Those first 3 Crystal Castles albums were amazing. North is probably the lowest key track and probably the second most filler track on there. Tapping Fingers is probably my highlight, track 9. The synth pads and melody are so strong, and it's got some really interesting lyrics about meeting in a car park and meeting each other being better than sleeping. Everything's better than sleeping though. It's quite desolate. Tapping Fingers as a way to speak, communication coming through. Again, it's really concise. It only goes through the whole verse structure normally and the chorus once, slightly revisiting it in a different form. I'm not so sure about the end, Bottom of the Ocean. It really doesn't function as a track as much as a palate cleanser. It's it's fine as a palate cleanser, but it goes for 7 minutes. Nothing on this album approaches that. It just doesn't develop enough. It's an ambient sort of piece with some vocal snippets, but I just wish it had developed more or given itself more of a purpose. But I really feel this is their strongest individual album. Very strong lyrically and vocally, and the soundstage, crawling deep cuts and silent shout. I really hope that they go down this road more often. I found their previous solo work, as I said, I admired them more than loved or listened to them. They're a bit austere and a little bit too arty for art's sake, as in Tom York's solo albums. But this one, I really felt like you're involved in it rather than you're supposed to look at it and admire. It seems to be directed towards the listener a lot more. So the first great album of the year for me, I'm going to give Radical Romantics by Fever Ray a 9 out of 10.